Sweet. Cool. Well, thank you all for coming here tonight. I really appreciate you guys taking time out of your day to, volunteer with us and taking time out of your summer, of course. So I'll try to get through this as quick as I possibly can. I know we said 6:30, and I'm going to try to stick to that as best we can. But if questions come up or other things might go a little bit over. But if anyone has any questions during the presentation, just this is a pretty informal occasion, so you can just shout them out. It's not a big deal. All right, let's see. We need to. Oh, I need to share my screen. There we go. Just hide this up here. All right. So we're just going to jump right into it. And again, if anyone has any questions, just feel free to shout them out. So just a little bit about me and myself before we get really into things. My name is Matt. I'm the Terrestrial Invasive Species Outreach Coordinator for the Finger Lakes PRISM. PRISM being an acronym standing for Partnership for Regional Invasive Species Management. We are a collaboration between the Finger Lakes Institute here at Hobart William Smith Colleges in Geneva and the New York DEC, with the goal of advancing invasive species outreach, education, and management in the Finger Lakes region. So seeing this little map over here, we cover a 17-county area, everything pretty much between, Rochester in the west, to Syracuse in the east, and between Lake Ontario and the Pennsylvania border. We're not the only organization that exists in this capacity. We are one of 8 regional PRISMs in New York State, with really the goal of sort of managing invasive species at the local level. So if you go west of us, you have, Buffalo area, Batavia, you'll have the Western New York PRISM. And if you go up into the Adirondacks, there's an Adirondack PRISM. If you go down to Long Island, there's a Long Island PRISM, and so on and so forth. Just making sure real here, if you're in the right place, this is the training for the Trail Trackers. Trail Trackers is our volunteer program that is meant for beginners. You're going to learn 7 invasive species tonight. And surveying is going to be pretty simple. You're just going to spot and point out whatever invasive species you see on the trail. We're going to have another one of these trainings on the 24th. So if you know someone who was interested in this but couldn't make it tonight, they can make it 6 o'clock on the 24th. We have a sort of a sister program to this called Trail Masters. This is more advanced, where volunteers will learn over 20 different invasive species, and they'll be using a slightly different survey method than what we're going to be talking about here tonight. We're going to be having 2 trainings for those, one on the 18th and one on June 7th. But let's just dive right into things. We're here tonight to talk about invasive species, and invasive species are one of the largest ecological issues that we face. And I think these 3 pictures do a really good job of showing the sort of damage that invasive species cause. We have up here in the top left a picture of a forest in Pennsylvania back in the 80s that was foliated. So all of these trees that are brown lost all of their leaves from gypsy moth, which is now known as spongy moth. Which spongy moth is one of the worst terrestrial invasive species, one of the worst insect invasive species that we have in our region. Down here in the bottom left, this is a car that's being pulled out of a lake. If any of you like to go fishing or boating on Lake Ontario or any of the Finger Lakes, you're definitely familiar with what is covering this car and all this crud. That is zebra mussels. Zebra mussels are one of the worst aquatic invasive species that we have, and they've really done a number on our freshwater ecosystems. And then finally, you can see in this picture on the right, there are these vines covering all of these trees and all of the ground cover here. This is not an invasive species that we have here in New York State, although climate change might have something to say about that. This is kudzu. And you can imagine, if you're a tree or a shrub or just any plant or animal living in this ecosystem that's covered in kudzu, you're not having a great time, right? It's hard to make a living when you're covered in these vines. Kudzu is not a problem here in New York State, but it is a problem down south. So you go to places like Virginia and Georgia, you'll see a lot of kudzu. What are invasive species? Why do we even care? Why are you guys even volunteering? Well, there's a lot of different ways you can describe invasive species, but really the sort of most simple one is an invasive species is any organism that is non-native to an ecosystem and whose introduction causes or is likely to cause economic or environmental harm or harm to human health. Generally, there are sets of characteristics that most invasive species share with one another, like these 3, that make them particularly invasive. So for one, they have a very high reproductive rate, they're very aggressive, They have very few natural predators. They have very low nutritional value, and so we sort of think of this as like they're the potato chips of the natural world. And they're really good at taking advantage of human disturbance. And what I mean by that is, as we humans continue to build, roads and highways and houses and cities and towns, as we continue to change the environment in which we live, it's often invasive species are very well adapted to living in these new places. You might be thinking, well, how does this even happen? How do invasive species move around the world? They can either be introduced intentionally or by accident. There's a lot of different pathways invasive species have moved through the past. Things like international trade and like hitchhiking on different vehicles that we have. Generally, when we're talking about invasive species, we're talking about invasive species that are coming from either Europe or Eastern Asia, at least from our perspective here in the eastern half of North America. There's two reasons for that. One is that these are the two regions of the world that are the most similar climatically to our own. So I just got back from Costa Rica. Costa Rica is a very different place. They don't have 4 seasons. They don't have cold winters or the same hot summers that we do. So invasive species that are going to survive in those habitats aren't really going to make it here. While species that live in Europe and Asia live in climates that have, 4 seasons. They have hot summers, they have cold winters, so they can survive pretty well here. Second reason is that these are the two parts of the world that we in the United States are just the most tied into, right? These are the places where we have the most tourists going back and forth. These are the places where we have the most trade going back and forth. And so with all of that movement of people and goods, invasive species are often coming along for the ride. And once invasive species get here, the costs can be very widespread. Invasive species have directly contributed to hundreds of species extinctions worldwide, like this golden toad right here, which is now extinct likely because of invasive species, and economically as well. In the US alone, we annually spend $120 billion controlling invasive species. So we spend a lot of money, whether that's through, removing things like dead ash trees, decreasing property values, increase in flooding, or any of the sort of costs that invasive species often bring with them. And invasive species often have a knack for being able to spread much faster than we are able to keep on top of, which is why we're doing this tonight. We're enlisting your help to make sure that we can track invasive species before they have the chance to widely spread. And sort of the way we can visualize how invasive species are able to spread is with what we call the invasion curve. This looks very similar to how, a lot of the graphs for COVID looked, right? And so oftentimes as an invasive species spread, by the time an invasive species becomes quite widespread, the costs of removing it and the area infested are often way too large for us to ever actually remove. So instead of finding invasive species on sort of the right end of the graph here, we're hoping to find invasive species with your help at the left end of the graph when they're first being introduced and the area that they infest is very small. And the costs of controlling those invasives is very low. So we'll actually be able to sort of nip those invasions right in the bud. So the trail survey, how does this work? So our goal is to identify, survey for, and report invasive species across the Finger Lakes region. And really anyone can participate who has just a smartphone or a tablet. It's really simple. It's really straightforward. You're allowed to survey on any trail near you. It's completely your choice. You're also allowed to You don't have to survey on a hiking trail. You can survey in any natural area, any setting. There's a park near you you like to go by, or, if you have a lot of property too, survey in your backyard. That's totally fine. The way we see this is that you guys are volunteers. You're doing us a favor. So, it's completely up to you. So where you would like to survey, whatever works with you. How is the data collected? So volunteers are asked to survey 3 times, once in June, once in July, and once in August. And we're going to be asking you to survey for 2 species each month. Why survey trails and not survey other regions? Well, trails are often areas that are frequently disturbed. And like what we talked about before, invasive species do really well in these disturbed environments. And so often the edges of forests where a trail will run alongside will have very different environmental conditions than sort of the interior of the forest. So we often see invasive species doing really well along trail sides and not doing as well in the interiors of the forest. And there's a really great picture that we have here that kind of shows that. So this is Japanese knotweed. This is an invasive species, and it's actually growing along a trail side. You could see this little sliver of brown right down here. That's actually where the trail is supposed to be. So oftentimes when you're walking along trails, you'll see scenes like this where you have these invasive species crowding in because there's a lot more sunlight coming in. And often you're not going to see situations like this as you go off the trail and deep into the interior of the forest. And so there's 3 steps to actually taking part in the trail survey. There's identifying invasive species, there's surveying for them, and then there's reporting them. And then we're going to go through each of these steps tonight. So identifying is super easy because we're just going to teach you. Part of this program is that you don't need to have any experience whatsoever, especially as being a trail tracker. We're going to keep things really simple for you. So if you're someone who doesn't really know how to identify invasive plants or animals, you've come to the right place. If you're someone, again, who's more interested in learning what a lot of these other invasive species are, take part in our Trail Masters training, or if you know someone, of course. Impacts of invasive plants are often very widespread, and that's going to be sort of the focus of the different invasive species we're going to be talking about. We're not really going to be talking about invasive animals all too much, just because we don't have as many invasive animals, and we don't have as many invasive animals that are having sorts of impacts that invasive plants are having. Invasive plants will often have a myriad of impacts on an ecosystem, so they can often grow really aggressively. They could crowd out native species, and they often really have low nutritional values. Deer really avoid most of the species we're going to be talking about tonight. And this is just a great example of just how bad invasive species can get. So you can see this little girl is pretty much being eaten alive by the stand of Japanese knotweed that's right behind her. Japanese knotweed is one of the worst invasive species we have, and we're trying to prevent scenes like this from occurring. So there we go. So in the past, we had this really complicated way of surveying, and we decided that it was really too much for people. It's a little too involved, and that's sort of what caused the birth of our Trail Masters program. So our Trail Masters are going to be doing a much more in-depth sort of survey method than what you guys are going to be doing, where they're going to be stopping every 50 feet. As a trail tracker, you guys don't need to know any of this. All you need to do is just report the invasive species you see along the trail side. You don't have to stop at any specific points. So if you're someone who's taken part in our trail survey before, and you're here tonight, you could pretty much throw all of that out the window, unless you're going to be a trail master. Reporting is going to be done through IMAP Invasives. So IMAP Invasives is an app that you can get on your phone, and all the species that you're going to be seeing, you're going to be reporting with IMAP and uploading them into a database. We're going to walk through how to actually do that in just a little bit. It could be a little bit of a hassle sometimes setting up an IMAP account. But basically the way we're going to do it is you're going to make an IMAP account, and then you're going to download the app and then join the Finger Lakes PRISM Volunteer Trail Survey. But like I said, we'll talk about that in just a little bit. And so with all of that being said, you might be thinking, well, does this even work? Like, does me going out and surveying for invasive species actually stop anything? And the answer is yes, it actually does. Regular people find invasive species well before the experts do, like myself, all the time. So the first spotted lanternfly population that was found in New York State, which was found in Ithaca, was found by just a normal passerby who just so happened to know what they were looking for. And you can see in the article over there that a 12-year-old was actually the first person who discovered invasive clams in a Minnesota lake. So you guys going out there and being sort of our eyes and ears out in the ground, you could absolutely be the very first person who might find an invasive species who is infesting an area. And you might be the person who will help lead us to shutting it down. So with that being said, we're going to move into how to actually identify different invasive species. So with that being said, does anyone have any questions so far about anything we've talked about? Okay, I'm going to take the silence as a no. So we're just going to jump right into it. So the way we're going to sort of set up identifying different invasive species is, like I said, we're going to be asking you guys to survey for 2 different invasive species each month. We're going to be asking you to survey for 1 emerging invasive species. So this is going to be an invasive species that's not widely found in our natural environment just yet, but we're starting to see it spreading. And then we're going to ask you to look for an invasive species that is established. So this is an invasive species that's very common. It's been present in our region for many decades. And we're just trying to get a better sense of where its populations are. And so you're going to be surveying for 2 different invasive species each month. So you're going to be changing what you're looking for as the different plants are flowering throughout the summer. So they're going to be easier to look for. So with that being said, the first species we're going to be talking about is Callery or Bradford pear. Some of you might have this in your front lawns. It's a very common ornamental tree. This is something we're going to be looking for in June, and it's an emerging invasive species. So it's just starting to enter into our natural environment. It's originally native to Asia, and please dismiss this part where it says biennial herb. I forgot to edit this part of the slide. That is a typo. It's actually a tree. I can grow to about 30 to 50 feet tall. The main way you're going to be able to identify Callery or Bradford pear is if you, especially right now, you're going to see these really brilliant white flowers, and they're pretty vivid on the tree. There's really no trees in our region that are going to have white flowers like these. And then the other way you can identify Callery pear is that it's going to have these sort of circular leaves. The leaves are going to be pretty small, no longer than your thumb, and they're going to have this sort of circular shape to them that is pretty distinct once you actually start comparing it with other tree species like our maples, which are going to have really pointed leaves. Excuse me. And then later on in the summer, we're not really going to be seeing this in June, but the flowers will develop into these sort of olive-colored fruits that will often spread by birds. Our established species for June is going to be garlic mustard. Garlic mustard is one of the most common invasive species that we have in our region. It's originally native to Europe. It's pretty unique as far as invasive species go. It's a biennial herb. So just like carrots, it's not an annual where it lives for 1 year, and it's not a perennial where it keeps coming back. It's a biennial, so it only lives for 2 years. It goes through 2 stages. The first stage of its life cycle, it'll be pretty small and low to the ground. That's what it looks like in this picture here in the top. The leaves will be sort of like a circular, almost like shaped like a horseshoe in a sense. In its second year, garlic mustard is going to shoot up. It can often get to like 3 to 4 feet tall. And the leaves are actually going to be triangular in shape. And you can see that really well in this picture in the bottom right here. Excuse me. Let me just get a drink of water here. Excuse me. In their second year as well, they're going to get these white flowers at the top. Garlic mustard is really concerned because it's allelopathic. So that means it actually injects toxic chemicals into the ground that kill plants nearby. So that's really a reason as to why garlic mustard is having such an impact on our native environment, because a lot of the native plants that grow in our forest understories like trillium and jack in the pulpit really suffer when garlic mustard starts to come in. For July, as our emerging invasive species, we're going to be having you guys look at slender false brome, which is a grass. Now, grasses can be pretty hard to tell apart, but the thing about slender false brome is that it often grows in the forest setting, so you're not really going to be looking for this, out in open fields. It's originally native to Eurasia and northern Africa, and the way you can identify slender false brome is that it has quite a few different adaptations and characteristics that sort of set it apart from your typical lawn grass species. For one, if you look in this picture right here, slender false brome will often have these hairs running down the actual leaves. So it's a very hairy grass. You're actually like holding it in your hands. And the stems themselves are actually hollow. So if you manage to find a stem anywhere and you break it open, you'll actually see that it's literally like a tube. So you can see the inside of it. There's really no other common native or invasive grass species that have that sort of characteristic. And then Slender false brome will often grow sort of like crabgrass, where it will grow in these clumps. So if you're, looking at different grass species and you see that there's a bunch of clumps everywhere and it's not sort of one contiguous mat, odds are what you're looking at is slender false brome. For our more established invasive species for July, we're going to be looking at swallowworts. So there are two different species of swallowwort. It's not really important that you need to know the difference between them. They pretty much have the same range, and they look pretty much the same. Their flowers are like a different color. It's not really big difference. It's originally native to Europe, and swallowworts can grow as either a vine, so like wrapping around other plants, or they could just grow as a weed, just coming out of the ground. The way you can identify swallowwort from other plants is first to look at the leaf arrangement. So swallowwort has what's called an opposite leaf arrangement. Most plants have what's alternate. So if you look at this diagram here at the top right, you could see on an alternating plant, if you imagine this sort of gray line as the actual stem, you'll have one leaf on one side and you'll have one leaf on the other side, and it'll just keep alternating as you go down the twig. That's not the case with swallowworts. Swallowworts will have an opposite leaf arrangement. So it means every time you see a leaf on one side of the twig, you will see and one immediately to the left of it or to the right of it. That's a trait that is not unique to swallowwort, but most plants have an alternate leaf arrangement. So it's something you could use to pick out swallowwort. Swallowwort will have these long pointed leaves, and they'll have star-shaped flowers. And you could see that in the bottom right over here. And I think here we go. So we have a picture that sort of zooms in on that a bit more, and you can see these little brown flowers. They're star-shaped, and they're pretty unique, right? There's not really a lot of flowers that resemble what swallowwort has here. And then finally, the other way that you can identify swallowwort is the seeds that will result from these flowers. So they'll have these sort of long tapering seed pods. Swallowwort's actually in the milkweed family. And so you can sort of imagine these seed pods as just like a really skinny version of a larger sort of more robust milkweed seed pod. One of the big problems with our swallowworts is that monarch butterflies will often lay their eggs on swallowworts, mistaking it for milkweed, and swallowwort is actually toxic to monarch butterflies. So we've seen a really big reduction in our monarch butterfly populations because of swallowworts. For August, as our emerging invasive species, we're going to be looking at purple loosestrife. Purple loosestrife is actually an invasive species we've been dealing with for quite a while. It used to be very well established, but we had a biocontrol and some insects that we released that actually reduced the population quite significantly. But there's actually signs that purple loosestrife is starting to spread again. And so we want to make sure that we're keeping on top of it before we get surprised if purple loosestrife really starts to spread. Purple loosestrife is going to be flowering in August, which is why we're having you look for it then. And purple loosestrife is really easy to tell apart when it flowers because it has these really brilliant, tall pink and purple flowers. You really can't miss it. Purple loosestrife is more of a wetland plant, so you'll often see it growing in swamps and bogs, but you can see it growing in forest settings as well. Outside of the purple flowers, the way you can identify purple loosestrife is just like with swallowworts. They have an opposite leaf arrangement. Again, not all invasive species have opposite leaf arrangements, native species do, but most plants that you find in general are going to have alternate leaf arrangement. That's not the case with purple loosestrife, just like with swallowwort, they're going to have opposite leaf arrangement. The other way you can tell purple loosestrife apart from other plants besides the flowers and the leaves is actually the color of the stem. The base of a purple loosestrife stem is going to be red in coloration. That's a characteristic that only purple loosestrife has, and is something that really none of our major common native plants have. So if you can't see any of the leaves, or you can't see any of the flowers or their coloration, or you're just maybe a little unsure, look for that red coloration on the stem, especially towards the base of the stem. As it gets more towards the top of the stem, sometimes it'll be more of a green color. And then finally, this is just sort of a bonus species to be on the lookout for. In August, this is definitely an emerging invasive species. Be on the lookout for spotted lanternfly. This really isn't something that you're going to be seeing in a forested setting. They're really more of an agricultural pest, but spotted lanternfly is spreading quite rapidly right now. And they reach their adult stage in August. So that's when they'll go from being this sort of black and red coloration you can see here in the bottom right to being fully fledged adults with wings, and they'll have these pink wings with black spots on them. You can see here in the bottom left. Be on the lookout for spotted lanternfly, and if you see it or you think at any point during the summer you think you see spotted lanternfly, please let me know. Spotted lanternfly is one of the really most concerning invasive species we've seen in quite some time. And we're sort of at an all points bulletin looking out for spotted lanternfly right now. For our established invasive species in August, we're going to be looking for autumn olive. Autumn olive is originally native to Eastern Asia. It grows more as a very large shrub or a tree. It's kind of hard to pick out when you're first looking for it, but once you know the key characteristics, autumn olive is actually really easy to tell apart. So the main way you're going to be looking at autumn olive is it's going to have these smaller leaves, just like calorie pear, but the leaves are actually going to have these white specks on them. And the berries are going to have this too. If you're ever surveying, in September and October, if you choose to do that after August, you'll see that the berries and the leaves themselves will have these little white specks on the surface of the leaves, on the underside of the leaves. This is a feature that only autumn olive has, and once you can pick it out, it's really easy to tell apart. So other than that, I mean, it's pretty easy. It's just sort of your generic looking shrub, larger shrub, smaller tree. The berries are actually edible, so, and they can taste really good sometimes. So, if you're on the trail and you're looking for a snack, give it a try. So with all that being said, I know we just talked about a lot of different species and how to identify them. And I completely understand if a lot of this information just went in one ear and right out the other. One good way that you can tell apart invasive species, once you're out on the trail after today, is to use an app that I highly recommend called Seek. Seek is an app that I use personally all the time. It's pretty much as simple as you just take your phone, you point it at something that you're trying to identify, and then it'll do its best to identify it for you. And so I used it on my ferret, and you can see that I correctly identified him as a European bullcat. And just to mention, there is a prize for taking part in the trail survey. Whoever gets the most points or the most observations, I should say, at the end of the summer will be in line for a prize. It's still in the works into exactly what it's going to be, but there should be an announcement pretty soon as to what the prize is going to be and what it looks like. It's going to be really cool. You're definitely going to want it. Cool. So are there any questions so far? Anything we've talked about?
Is there anything we're supposed to do as far as removing the species?
No. So this is nothing that we're going to be doing for is removing. We are just looking to monitor and report where invasive species are being found.
Okay. Is there any way to kill Japanese knotweed?
Oh boy. Yeah, but it's really hard, especially if you're not using pesticides. Yeah. If you want to talk more about Japanese knotweed, feel free to shoot me an email.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. So took a little bit longer than I would have liked, and we still need to go through how to actually report all these invasive species. Are people okay with staying on for maybe another 10, 15 minutes just to very quickly go through how to report with your phone. I don't want to take up anyone's time here. Okay,
I'm good.
great. Awesome. Okay, so if everyone can just get a smartphone, we're gonna go through how to actually download and then use IMAP invasives. We're just gonna switch gears here real quick. And we're just gonna really try to breeze through this PowerPoint here, so we don't need to do this. So IMAP invasives is a part of the New York Natural Heritage Program. It's a partnership between the DEC and my alma mater, SUNY ESF. And basically what we use IMAP invasives for is to fill in data gaps for invasive species in our region. So you can see here, you know, the tree of heaven, this is all the spots where we found it. Are these data gaps, are these areas where tree of heaven hasn't been found, or is it just because it's there and no one's actually noticed it yet? IMAP invasives is really important because it's a data source for pretty much all the big players in conservation in New York State. So we at the PRISM use it. All of the PRISMs use IMAP invasives, as well as local, state, and federal agencies. Adirondack Mountain Club, Cornell Cooperative Extension, New York State Parks, everyone is using IMAP invasives. Let's go to the next slide. So in terms of reporting, there's 3 basic steps. We're just going to set up the account in the app. We're going to record invasive species, and we're going to upload records to IMAP. We're going to start, of course, with setting up an account. So if actually, let me get the link here. I will stop sharing my screen temporarily. You know, I actually want to see if this works because I've heard that it's changed recently. So if folks want to just download the IMAP invasives app on their phone right now, I don't know if anyone has had the chance to do so already. So we used to have to do it where you could, you would have to make your account like online, like on your desktop, and then you would have to go to like the actual app to use it afterwards. But I want to see if we could maybe get around this because it could kind of be cumbersome sometimes. So if you go to the App Store or the Google Play Store, if you just type in IMAP invasives, you should see an app that comes up that says IMAP invasives mobile, and it'll be a white box, the green leaf, and a little bug. Everyone's seeing that so far. Just go ahead and download that. And so once you download that, are you given a prompt that lets you set up an account right then and there? Yes, no, maybe so.
There's a link that allows you to click on it and it'll redirect you.
Okay, great. Well, I apologize for the kind of haphazard nature of this. They kind of just changed this, and this is the first time I'm working with the new setup that they have. So if you just want to make an account real quick, it's pretty simple. It's just like making an account with any other you know, service that you used before. Just need a username and an email. And if anyone's having any trouble, just let me know.
What if you already have an account?
If you have an account, then you could just, you know, forget everything I'm saying right now.
Okay.
And if you have an account and you know how to take points with it, at this point, you're pretty good to leave. Because we're basically just going to go through how the actual reporting works.
Do we have to put in the right project?
Yes.
Okay, so I'd like to know how to do that.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to send the link.
What's the jurisdiction?
Jurisdiction is going to be New York.
Okay.
And so I just sent a link in the chat to the actual website itself. We are going to need to use the website just so you can join the projects beforehand. Okay, great. So I will go back to sharing my screen. I'll go back to the presentation here. So once you made your account, we'll just go through how to take a point, and then we'll talk about the project joining stuff later. It's pretty easy to actually use the app once you've made the account itself. So I'm assuming everyone's logged in at this point. Is there anyone who has had any trouble with setting up IMAP on their phone? Okay, I'm going to take that as a no. So when you first get onto IMAP, you should be sort of greeted with this blank green screen. The way that you can log in the future is that you would go to preferences, and then you would then enter in your username and your password. This is if it ever logs you out. There's preferences, basically the settings for IMAP invasives. There's lots of different stuff that you can change around and play with here. But this isn't really important right now. We're just going to go through how to take a point. So when it comes to recording invasive species, it's really important to know that you do not need an internet connection to take a point. So you could be in an area that has absolutely no cell service, and you could still take a point with IMAP invasive. So what we're going to do right now is we're just going to walk through how to take a point with your phone. We're just going to practice. So if you could just go to the top right of IMAP and just hit add observation, just follow along. So the first thing you'll see when you get there is you'll see this this option where it says take photo using a camera. You don't have to do this right now, but this is just what you'll need to do when you're actually taking a point out in the field. So you'll take a photo using your camera. You don't need to enable your custom species list, but below that, you'll see a drop-down list for different species. Go ahead and just select fake species because we're just practicing points for right now. But right below that, you'll see an option to put species detected or species not detected. We only want you to be taking points if you actually find the invasive species. So always make sure that you're putting species detected if you think you see something. We don't really need negative data for this. Below all that, there's going to be a map. You could pretty much forget the map. It's just automatically going to record your location and your latitude and longitude wherever you are, but you don't need to change it. You don't need to do anything with it. Below that, and we'll talk about how to do this in just a second. You're going to join Finger Lakes PRISM Volunteer Trail Survey as your IMAP project. Basically, all that does is that it sort of collects all of the data that you guys are going to be taking together, which is going to make it easier for us to look through and see all the progress that we've been making. Things like organization, things like time search, you could skip all that. The only other things that we're going to be looking for is size of area containing the invasive. And you're going to be given a few options for this. Just do your best guess as to whatever invasive species you're looking at, however large that area is, whether that's, a small area or quite a large area. Up to 10 square feet or more than an acre. And then the other thing you're going to be entering is the distribution of the invasive. So this is basically whether you see a few scattered clumps, which would be something like sparse or very dense grouping of plants, or even just a monoculture, which is all you see are that particular invasive species. For right now, feel free to just enter in any random selection. We're just taking your practice point. Once you actually get out in the fields, you're going to be using more specific measurements. And then just make sure you hit save. And then if you ever need to add in any observation comments, this is totally up to you. There's no requirement that you do this, but you just want to add in some observation comments about maybe the size of the plants that you're looking at, or just the general characteristics of the site. Maybe they're up on maybe the invasive species you're looking at are up on a hill. Maybe, it's on a very heavily trafficked trail. Feel free to enter that in the comments below, but you don't really need to when we're not expecting you to when you're taking points. After that, you're going to be uploading the records to IMAP. So once you create that little fake point and then you hit save, you should see a little yellow card pop up on that blank green screen we were greeted with earlier. If you ever need to go back and edit a point that you've taken, you could always just hit that little pencil and it'll take you right there. But for now, we're just going to upload this point. So if you just check that little gray box, you go to the top left where those 3 lines are, and you just hit upload selected. It'll ask you if you want to upload that record. You're just going to hit OK. And then once that record has been uploaded, you're just going to have a blank green screen again. And so what's important to note here is that the points that you take are not going to be uploaded until you manually do it yourself. So the points are not uploaded automatically to the database. You have to make that decision on your own. And so the reasoning behind this is that if you're in an area that doesn't have a lot of cell reception, you can always go home and then upload those points when you have Wi-Fi or cell service later on. So just make sure you remember that if you see this yellow card here, the point is still on your phone. I can't see it. I can only see it once it has been sort of uploaded manually. We'll be talking about the project in just a second. We're going to have to do that online. So that's pretty much the basics of uploading a point to IMAP. Is everyone familiar with how that works? Does it make sense? Okay, I'm going to take
Will you
that.
be sharing these directions?
Yes, I'm going to be sharing out the PowerPoint after tonight.
Great, thank you.
Yep, no problem. Yeah, so if you have any trouble or if you just need a refresher at any point, yeah, just shoot me an email or I'll be sending this out too. So the only thing we need to do from here on out is just to actually join the IMAP Invasives project. So this is going to be something you're going to have to do either on your mobile browser or on your desktop. So if everyone can just, I'll resend it in the chat here, go to the following link in the chat and we'll just walk through this pretty quick. So basically, once you upload a point to IMAP Invasives, those points just sort of float around in the database and I won't be able to actually organize that data. And so what we're going to be asking you to do when you're taking your points is that you make sure that it is listed under the Finger Lakes Trail Survey project. It just helps us organize all of the data. It makes it a lot harder for me to find the sort of progress that you're making unless you use the project. So if you follow that link, you should be greeted with the New York IMAP Invasives website. Are we all seeing that so far? Yes, okay. So you're just gonna go to the top right here and click login. We don't need to create an account because you guys just made one. So if you just wanna type in your email and your password at the very top here, just hit login. And so then once you log in, and of course, if you're maybe a little bit behind, just, feel free to shoot a question after the presentation here. You'll be greeted with the screen where it has IMAP Invasives has been updated. Feel free to just click OK. This is the IMAP Invasives online tool. If you ever are just interested in invasive species and where they're found, I encourage you to play around with it. It is pretty interesting to use, but for now, out of all these different action tools, we're just going to be looking for the main menu, which is going to be at the very top left of the screen. You're going to click on that. Out of the drop-down menu, you're just going to hit projects. Once you get to projects, you're just going to type in Finger Lakes into the search bar right here. And make sure your jurisdiction is for New York State. And then once you type in Finger Lakes, this is for an old project that I had, but you should see Finger Lakes Volunteer Trail Survey pop up. Once you see that, click the link for it. Just give people a second just to do that in case you're falling behind at all. Marcel, if you're speaking, you're muted.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Is it the one that says Finger Lakes PRISM Volunteer Trail Survey?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. So once you click on that, you'll see this big page with everyone who's been a member so far. Just go to the very top right where it says request to join a project, just click on that. And then I have to actually add you to the project later on. So once you've done that, that's pretty much it as far as projects go. The only thing you'll need to do is just to go back to the mobile app and go back to preferences, and just make sure that you hit retrieve IMAP lists, and just do that either tomorrow or sometime later on. This is just basically the way that the app refreshes itself. And so right now the app doesn't know that you've decided to join the Finger Lakes PRISM Volunteer Trail Survey. And so once you hit retrieve IMAP lists, you'll then have the option of selecting that as part of the project when you're actually uploading your points. So just make sure that you remember to do that later on. And of course, if you have any questions about any of this or how it works, just ask me at the end, or feel free to shoot me an email. But other than that, that's pretty much it. Just make sure that you're taking good photos. We don't really want anything that's blurry or not clear, as clear as it could possibly be. And if you are seeing something, try to give a sense of scale as well. Put your hand behind the leaf, or maybe have something in the background. Just a little advertisement. If you're interested in a more invasive species sort of education, New York Invasive Species Awareness Week is upcoming. It's going to be from June 6th to June 12th. And we're going to be doing lots of different activities throughout that week, like tablings and documentary screenings and guided hikes and kayaking. And so if you're interested in coming out with us in the fields for different invasive species projects, just keep an eye out. You could see a calendar of events at fingerlakesinvasives.org, or we'll be posting stuff to our Facebook page at Finger Lakes PRISM, or our Twitter or Instagram in the meantime. So just if you're interested, keep this on your radar. Other than that, you're pretty much all ready to go. You could start surveying as soon as you'd like. If you need help finding any locations, feel free to let me know. I go hiking a lot. I know a lot of the trails pretty well in our area. So if you're just a little confused as to where, literally where to start, I could help point you in the right direction of different trails or state parks to check out. And of course, if you have any questions at all throughout the summer about how to take a point, or how to identify invasive species, or how to use IMAP, or how do I pay my taxes, shoot me an email at gallo, GALLO, at hws.edu with any questions. I would be happy to answer them. So thank you. Does anyone have any questions so far?
Yeah, is there any way for the members of that group to communicate with each other?
Yeah, so we do have a Facebook group. I think it's just Finger Lakes Trail Survey. I could send a link out to that. We haven't started running it just yet because this is the very first training that we're holding. So the group isn't really active right now. But yeah, we will have a Facebook group where if you have any questions or you just want to talk to other people who are part of the trail survey.
I was just kind of wondering on, how do you know if someone's been on the Cuke Outlet Trail?
Oh yeah, that's that's
kind of
a question we get all the time. See, the thing is that our region is so undersurveyed that odds are if you are going to be surveying a different trail, no one surveyed that trail before. And because we're asking you to look for very specific species, even if someone has surveyed that trail before, they might have surveyed it for a different invasive species, right? So we're not asking you guys to look for Japanese knotweed. So if you're doing the Cuke Outlet Trail and someone has already surveyed it for Japanese knotweed, well, if you're going down looking for garlic mustard, then your points aren't necessarily going to conflict, right, in any way. So I wouldn't feel any pressure at all to worry about whether I'm surveying a trail that has been surveyed already or hasn't, or anything like that.
Now, what if we know other invasive species like knotweed or multiflora rose?
Feel
Should
free
we report those?
Yeah, I mean, it's totally up to you. If you're someone who's already pretty knowledgeable in it and you want to report those, by all means. The only thing we're requiring you to do is just for the invasive species that we specifically talked about.
I'd like to learn how to kill the multiflora rose too, so I'll send you an email.
Yeah, send me an email because we could definitely talk a lot more.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Katie. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I don't think we have any other questions. Speak now or forever hold your peace. I apologize for going over about 20 minutes there. I was really hoping that I cut a lot of stuff out. I was really hoping that we'd be able to get it under an hour, so I apologize. But if you have any questions, you going forward, I'm always available via email. So just let me know. And thank you all so much for participating in this. It really means a lot that you guys are taking time, out of your schedules, out of your days to help look for invasive species. It's awesome that you're doing this. So other than that, have a good night. Enjoy the really nice weather.
All right, thanks.
Have a good one.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.